Me lay me down, me all alone, open the rum. Oh yeah, me all alone with jug of rum. Me stand and wait for boat to come. It's long the night, it's quiet the dark. The boat she late since 12 o'clock. Me watch the tide easing in. It's low the moon, but high the wind. Havana moon, Havana moon. Let me tell you, me all alone, me open the rum. It's long the wait for boat to come. American girl say she come back to me. We'll sail away across the sea. We dock in New York, the buildings they high. We find a home high up in the sky. Me all still alone, me sip on the rum. Me wonder when the boat she come to bring me love. That sweet little thing, she rock and roll, she dance and sing. She hold me tight, she touching me lips. Me eyes they close, me heart she flip. Havana moon, Havana moon. Me still alone, drinking the rum. Begin to think the boat don't come. American girl, maybe she tell me lie. She say till then when she mean goodbye. Havana moon, Havana moon. Me lay down alone, was good the rum. Me fall asleep, the boat she come. The girl she look until the dawn. She weep and cry, return home alone. The whistle blow, me open me eyes. Was bright the sun, was blue the sky. Me grab me shoes, me jump and me run. Me see the boat on the horizon. Havana moon, Havana moon, Havana moon. Was good the rum, the boat she sailed, me love she gone. Havana moon, Havana moon, Havana moon, Havana moon. That was Chuck Berry, Havana Moon. Many people have never heard that song, but it's one of my favorite Chuck Berry songs. And since we were talking about Cuba, I decided to use it as my song for this show. Now, in the next segment, we're going to take off with my friend here, and he's going to get into some very heavy stuff. So just stay where you are, and we're coming right up, okay? Okay, I want to take just a brief second here. If you want to help support me, please hit the like button, hit the subscription button, and do a favor, share this with your friends from you, okay? Sort of help to get the word out. This will help me greatly. Thank you so much. This is, once again, this is Alligator in Alignment. I'm here with Myron Ort, a friend of mine recently. Well, I met him some time ago. And upon meeting him, you meet certain people and you say, wow, this is, I can relate. I can relate. So I found out some things about him through a friend of mine, Jebediah, and I once meeting him, then it was like, okay, I gotta feature him on my show. So we're gonna get started. My friend, where were you originally from?
I was born in Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles, and you had an early introduction to music?
Right. Well, back then, radio was the thing. Television was just coming in. So on the radio, uh, there were music shows, and I was kind of a radio guy, so I had a set of headphones. So on school nights, when the folks thought, turn off that radio, it's a school night, I was still listening to the shows. I was listening to rhythm and blues, and then after rhythm and blues, if I was still awake, then on came jazz. And one thing I noticed, and I've told this story often, that certain phrases, musical phrases that I heard in the blues and rhythm and blues, then the jazz show comes on and I'm listening to the tenor sax solo and that's that same phrase. I say, this is some kind of language. And so that's always been of interest to me. And of course, I'm a big jazz fan. And originally, of course, back in the 50s, I knew about all the rhythm and blues before the other kids at school knew about them. And I'd say, hey, wait till you hear this Great Pretender, man, that's a good tune. And I would always know from the Johnny Otis show, which was on the radio, I would always know the real original versions of these by the black artists, not the white covers, which you would see on a TV show called This Is Your Hit Parade. And then you'd have these...
I remember that.
And they would... and I remember even with country music, they say, well, this is a tune by Hank Williams. So they were doing country music and of course some of the rock and roll. So I was always tuned into the real deal. And also in the afternoon in LA radio, the Chico Sesma show was the Latin music show. And that introduced me to Latin music, and I was immediately drawn to the beat in that music. I probably maybe heard something similar in a few popular tunes. I think Harry Belafonte or somebody was just coming on the scene with Banana Boat or whatever.
Oh, yes.
So I would hear something in there that grabbed me. And it was basically the two open notes on the drum. Most of these tunes are in 4/4. So I would hear those two notes, and I would follow that. Now, I think I was 12 or 13, and my folks had a little small little barrel of brandied dates or something, mission pack brandied dates, a little barrel. In fact, I have one of those barrels here somewhere. Anyway, I was always encouraging the folks, finish those dates, I want that barrel, because I knew I could make a little drum out of that. And I guess I found a little piece of leather, and I somehow got it on there. Then later I started hanging out, as the years went by. And I would be in the bathroom. They had an electric heater in the bathroom. It's all tiled, and so there's a lot of echo. And I would take that heater, take the little drum, put it next to the heater, and tune that skin up, because it was just tacked on, or it wasn't even tacked on. I think I used the rim of the hoop of the drum or whatever. And I'd get it, and I would try to practice the beat that I heard, and mostly that, but also a little roll. I would go, try to learn that. Well, as the years went by, I think I was in junior high or something, I started hanging out there was a store up on Santa Monica called Drum City. And they had a lot of drums in there, a lot of percussion instruments. And at that time, by the way, I think that store was run by the old guy that was called Pops, and his son was a drummer named Roy Hart. He had recorded a few things on the World Pacific label with different bands, West Coast jazz. But he worked in the store, and I'd see how he put on the skins, because back then there were no commercial conga drums to speak of. And I saw how he would soak the skins and tack them onto these barrels that they had made. And when they dried, they put them out on the floor, and they sounded so good when they were fresh. And I could never afford one. I think eventually, as time went on, I begged, and they said, well, we have a shell in a warehouse somewhere that we could probably let you have. And I brought my mother up to the store, and I think they charged us $20 for this oak shell that was never completed because it wasn't perfect or something. And I bought that drum, and I knew how to put the skin on there, and we tacked it on there. And this would have been in the mid-50s. And I remember that was my thing. So when they had a talent show at the high school, I could play the conga drums. And I remember, believe it or not, there was a show, a TV show called Spotlight on Youth. And some gal at the high school was singing That Old Black Magic. And I was playing the conga drums. And they started the show with a close-up of my nail-bitten hands playing the conga drum. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit today is what you know as the conga drum, and I have one here. We call it a conga drum. It's the most universal hand percussion instrument used in popular music, salsa music, Afro-Cuban music, even African music. And why is that? Well, there were many, many different types and styles and cultural traditions of drums that were manifested in Cuba because of all the different nationalities of the various enslaved Africans that were imported there. They all had their different traditions and had different style drums made different ways. But this eventually evolved to the one that got evolved the most was the conga drum. Now the conga drum, the term that would be used for all of them, or all of the conga, would be a tumbadora. But tumbadores come in different sizes. So you got a small one, it's called a quinto, and then you have
Oh yeah, I've heard this.
yeah, different names for them, and a tumba. So the word tumba is for the large drum, and then sometimes they call the middle drum a conga drum, C-O-N-G-A. Not a Congo drum, not a conga drum, not a kunga. It's a conga drum. And what's confusing a little bit is there's also a type of music called conga, which is the music that they play in the streets and the parades with these bands with trumpets, at least in Havana with trumpets and a lot of percussion. And that's called a conga. And the type of group is called a comparsa. Now, over in the eastern part of Cuba, they have a different style of parade, where they use a different style drum. It's not curved like a conga drum. It's a straight drum, and it's called a boku, B-O-K-U. And for the metal part, they play what appears to be a brake drum, a metal brake drum, which you get pretty tiring holding that up, hitting it with a nail. And then they have different kind of bass drums that are homemade. And then instead of a trumpet, they have what's called a Chinese trumpet, which is really an oboe. It's a double-reeded instrument. And that style of street conga music in Santiago is different than in Havana. Now, it's interesting, because we all know who Desi Arnaz was.
Oh yes.
Now, everybody thinks Desi Arnaz played a conga drum. He did not. I've never seen a picture. I don't think he ever played a conga drum.
No, wasn't a conga.
He played a boku, a straight-sided drum.
Yeah.
And his father was actually the mayor of Santiago. And his father was even involved at one point in outlawing those drums. Which did happen occasionally in Cuba.
Yeah.
There's always this fear of, they're going to foment a revolution with some secret language on the drums. Anyway, so the conga drum evolved, and when I was coming up, those drums in the store in Santa Monica, they just tacked the heads on with little nails and then put a decorative band around it. Yeah. But in the 40s and the 50s, developing in Cuba, first with the bongo drum, which is the little drums that you play between your legs, the two heads. Hardware was being developed to tune them because it was a big. Even in the 20s, you'd see a picture of one of these sewn bands from Havana, and the bongo player right next to his foot, you'd see he had a little kerosene heater to heat up the head of the macho, which is the small drum. The big drum's called a hembra. As time went on, they developed tuning hardware. They developed some hardware system, and it's actually probably a Chinese Cuban who I think was known to do the metal work on these drums early. So by the 50s, the tuning hardware came to the conga drum as well. It was behind the bongo. Bongo had tuning hardware for many years before they put it on the conga, because the early Cuban music was mostly bongo. Why? Because when they recorded that music, the bongo, which is high pitch, could be heard on those primitive recordings. The conga drum was barely audible in the bass there. So when the famous conga drummer Chano Pozo, who came up to the United States to play with Dizzy Gillespie. Well, prior to that, that was in the mid to late 40s. Prior to that, Chano had a band, or he would play with different orchestras, and you'd have these old 78 records. Supposedly, Chano Pozo's playing conga drum in there, and you're hard-pressed to hear that conga drum. So everybody thinks that the bongo playing is Chano Pozo. It's not. You can barely hear the conga drum. You could first hear the conga drum when he was with Dizzy Gillespie. Then you could really hear it. They had a tune called Manteca, which is like the beginning of what they called Latin jazz. And Chano Pozo was playing a tack head drum, no tuning hardware, and there's no pictures of Chano ever playing a conga drum with tuned hardware. It's all the tack heads. I have some tack heads. I like them because you don't have the heaviness of the metal rubbing against your legs or the other drums. And so what you would hear Chano Pozo play, and I'm going to play it here, is a beat that we sometimes call a tumbao. Remember the word tumba, tumbadora,
Okay.
tumbao is a very general term in Cuban music. It can mean everything from the bass part to the drum part and to the piano part even. I mean, there's many names for those piano parts. Guajeo, montuno, tumbao. The modern Cubans just call them tumbaos. So the bass player plays a tumbao, the conga drummer plays a tumbao, sometimes called a marcha, which you can tell from the way. So I'm going to demonstrate that beat, and I'm going to tune the drum up with my little wrench here. So first we'll play it without being tuned up. So what you would hear Chano Pozo play, and Chano Pozo had to have, before a performance, he'd take his shirt off, he'd oil up his skin, they feature him out there, and he would have to tune up his drums. And then there was a little can that they used to, it was called sterno. It was a little can that made heat that you would put in a little burner to heat up your beans, or I don't know what they use them for. So Chano would have to heat up the head of the drum, and it would tune it up. And that beat sounded like this. Okay. Now we have the luxury of being able to tune up a drum with a wrench. So on a humid day when the drum head would go down too low, you could tune it up. Nowadays, of course, the latest thing is every traveling musicians, they don't even want to do that. They play plastic heads because they stay in tune. They go from city to city, from gig to gig. They don't even have to detune the drum in between the performances. They've got these plastic heads, and they seem to work. I mean, the purists like the real. So you heard the sound of this tumbadora. I'm going to now tune it up. And when you tune it up, not only does the pitch get higher, but the drum head is more responsive to making other tones. So I usually count. There's usually 5 lugs or 6 lugs, and you try to keep it even. You don't want the head to get lopsided. I already lost count here, so I usually go 5 and start over. So I'm tuning this drum up to get a better sound, and so that I can extract from that drum more of the pitches that are contained in the head of that drum. Let's see where we're at now. Quite a bit of difference there.
Yes.
So I'm going to do it one more time here. Now the size of this drum that I'm doing now would be the conga, not the quinto. The small one we call quinto. This would be a conga, and then the low drum is a tumba. So think about that word tumba, tumbadora. The root of that, whatever that is, probably comes from some African word, because you think of all these drums, a timpani, still got with a T there. So now we got a slightly better sound. Now let's play the tumbao that way. Now I can get that slap higher. It's a very universal rhythm, heard all over the world in every type of music. This is the most basic beat that we like to play. Every conga drummer plays this. was coming up, you could hear the conga drum in some of this music, but the real breakthrough, at least on the West Coast, came when a jazz vibist named Alligator decided to have a Latin jazz quintet. And he hired two of the best percussionists out of New York City, one of whom was Cuban, the other was Puerto Rican. And they were playing with the Tito Puente Orchestra, which we didn't hear that much out on the West Coast, except for when he recorded on RCA. But when he was recording on the Tico label, we didn't get those records out here on the West Coast so as much as the RCA ones. So I think in the mid-'50s I had one Tito Puente record, great record, called Cuban Carnival. And I could hear Tito in there.
He is amazing.
And the conga drummer was named Mongo Santa Maria.
Oh.
And Mongo Santa Maria carried on the tradition of Chano Pozo. Chano Pozo came to the U.S., played with Dizzy Gillespie. He was kind of a street guy, and I think in the late 40s he was murdered in New York over some drug deal or something. Who knows? Anyway, Chano also, when he was in Cuba, would compose tunes. When I say compose, he probably picked up a melody or something was in his head from the streets, and he would go to this special drugstore in Havana. Upstairs there was a piano player who would write down the music. And then Chano would get a few dollars, or whatever, pesos, whatever, for the composing. And that meant a lot to him, to have those dollars.
Yeah.
And so Chano made many tunes, and you can almost hear the influence of the drum. One tune was called Blem Blem Blem, which is nothing but a clave rhythm. Blem 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 Blem. It's just a clave rhythm. But he when he was with Dizzy, he wrote a tune, or at least the first part of the tune, called Manteca. And the second part of the tune was the bridge, was composed by Dizzy Gillespie and somebody else whose name slips my mind. And that became the anthem of Latin jazz. But let me talk about this beat some more, because a conga drum is basically a barrel. It's a modified barrel. In fact, the early drums were made from recycled oak barrels. They'd take an oak barrel. Now, even going back further into the history, when you see some of the drums from the islands, even at the turn of the century, they were these large oak barrels that weren't altered. They were just great big, and they would sit on those drums, sometimes using the heel of their foot to alter the pitch, and they would play. And there's all throughout the islands there are those kind of drums, and they even the drums in the eastern part of Cuba, there's a type of music called tumba francesa, and all those drums look like big barrels. And I've made some of those, and I'm going to talk about the whole idea of making drums. But getting back to the conga drum, it has a thick skin, a bovine skin, a mule skin, a cow skin, whatever. Unlike the popular drums of today that came from Africa called djembes, which use a thin goat skin, which are tuned with ropes. And that's a whole different style. Now, it's fun to play djembes, and that's a very popular thing, especially with people that can't play very much going to drum circles, because it's easy to get a tone out of those drums. But the point is that those drums, djembes, do not fit a lot of genres of music. They basically are used for a certain type of African music. And they're fun to play, especially if you play in the authentic styles. But they don't fit into popular music, into country music, into rock and roll, into salsa, into Latin jazz. You need a conga drum to do that. And the other drum that does use a thin skin is played with sticks, and it's called the timbales. And that's what Tito Puente played. And the timbale player plays a cowbell, and he plays two drums. They're usually metal rims with thinner skins that are tuned. And they're very loud, and they take these very aggressive type solos, which come at the climax of the music, and it's really wonderful. And I play timbales also, and I play bongos. My first instrument was really the bongo drum. The conga drum shortly thereafter. So this beat, we'll call it a tumba or marcha. The little high-pitched thing we call a slap, and it's tricky to get. It depends on the weather almost, and it depends on your hand, and it depends on your experience. And I spent my whole life trying to get those. Every drum is different, and you have to find a way to get that high-pitched sound. When you heard Mongo with Alligator, he had an amazing slap sound, this beautiful resonant flaps on, and he played conga drums that were made in Cuba, special called Vergara. It was like a pioneering drum with the tuned hardware he'd have them made in Cuba. And I didn't know that at the time, but that was one of the secrets. You got to start with a really good instrument to get all those tones. But of course, Mongo was just amazing.
He was. I saw him a couple of times in New York.
Yeah, he even came to our town in Katati one time. But then he was an old man, and every finger had bandages on him, and so forth. And the point is that when Cal Jader made those recordings, several things happened. First of all, it was a small group, a quintet, where you could hear every instrument, and it was recorded on the Fantasy label out of San Francisco at the time. And you could hear all the details. You could hear all those cowbell patterns. You could hear exactly what Mongo was doing. He wasn't buried in a large band with all kinds of trumpets and saxophones and other percussion recorded with one microphone. And Cal Jader credited, like jazz musicians, when you got an album, you knew who the musicians were because he gave them credit. That was a big breakthrough. So the early Cal Jader quintet that had Mongo, because he had earlier ones, was Willie Bobo on timbales, Mongo Santa Maria, Al McKibben, who was a bass player that played with Dizzy Gillespie, and that vintage would have been Vince Guaraldi on piano, and then Cal Jader. And they made wonderful, wonderful recordings, all of which are still being issued, and they're just classic recordings. And Jader composed tunes, and he was a very lyrical vibe player. Now, Tito Puente also played vibes, and that was probably Cal Jader's inspiration to take the vibes in the direction of Latin music. Now, Latin music has a slightly different foundation. Everything's based on what we think of here as a two-bar phrase called the clave. Da, 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 da. So all the music is structured around that, and that's what gives it a certain appeal, makes it very danceable. But you have to adhere to that implied structure. Okay, now I want to mention that because I started out with a drum shell from the warehouse down there in Drum City, I always had a love of the conga drum. So in the last many decades, I've collected a lot of, now these drums are old and falling apart. They were abused, and I've restored a number of these drums. All these drums I'm playing now are drums that I picked up. They were bargains, they were broken, and I glued them back together and repaired them and restored them, put new skins on, fixed the hardware. And I have a collection of these drums, and now I'm coming to that point where some of those are for sale. And so I'm going to give a little pitch for myself. If you're interested in a vintage conga drum, you can try to contact me, and I've got a number of vintage conga drums, and I will give you a free conga drum lesson. And if you want to continue taking lessons, I would be open to that too. And I don't expect to get too many people on this, but I do know a few things. Although I'm no longer out there as a professional musician. That's quite a lifestyle, and Alligator would surely confirm with that. So let's see. Another thing you can do is I do have a website, which is now it's called MyronOrt.com, MYRONORT.com. And on that website, there are certain pages that have to do with music, an interview with the great Cuban pianist and composer Rene Toussaint, some early recordings of the first folklorical recordings of Cuban music are on there, and an article about that. Some of my own music I have. I've made, in addition to conga drums, I've made a lot of experimental percussion instruments. And they were featured in one issue of a magazine that's no longer around called Experimental Musical Instruments. And I had an issue of that, and we even made a tape. And some of those little snippets are on the website. You can hear some of where I'm taking Afro-Cuban patterns and playing them on experimental instruments that are based on real percussion instruments. I mean, a percussionist can play anything. In Cuba, when the drums were outlawed, like I said
You know,
before, the dock workers would take
this
boxes.
this is a subject I want to get into on our next show, because I
What?
think I know where you're going. The next show I wanted to talk about the how people played the farm instrument.
Yeah,
Instruments and all
yeah,
this
yeah.
stuff.
Well, yeah,
And-
right. The rhythm. There's two things. There's the rhythmic concept. Then there's the instrument. But you can play that rhythmic thing on a door, on a tabletop, on a drawer. In fact, the popular instrument today, called a cajon, is actually a box, a wooden box.
Yeah.
And that's been perfected and made into a regular instrument. But originally, the dock workers would have a great big codfish box that they modified a little bit, and they stored them on the dock. And during their breaks, they would play rumba music. A guy would be sitting on that box playing the bass part. Another guy might have the middle part, and then the quinto player that plays kind of a lead part. He would have a little candle box where the candles came from the church, and they would, and these instruments have their own modern versions now. But like Alligator's pointing out, some of the other instruments, like in mbembe music, a traditional instrument is the blade of a hoe blade.
Yeah.
That was used out in the fields, retired from probably years of labor, and then hit with a nail and has a beautiful metallic sound.
You see, the next, my mom had to wrap this one up here, but the next one we do, I really want that to be a part of it, because these people don't know that this is the second time I messed up our first talk that we had, but anyway, and there was a correlation between, like the jawbone of an ass, how it was used there, and it was also used in Louisiana. Blah, blah, blah. That's a subject for another day.
Well, I'd like to point out one little interesting thing. Not only can you make instruments out of certain things that you modify, there are some instruments that occur in nature. And when I discovered these years ago when I went down to Cabo San Lucas, down in Baja California, and there's a tree called a flamboyant tree, and the seed pods right off the tree
shaker.
are a shaker,
Yeah.
and those shakers are sacred to a particular deity in Santeria, and it's an instrument off a tree. It's ready made.
That's an entire subject, because I remember when growing up we actually for certain ceremonies and just in music, we played incredible things, and I think there's a correlation probably around the world for that too. But at this point, this is Alligator in Alignment. Once again, let the people know about your website.
Oh, yeah. So my name is Myron Ort, Myron, and my website, which I'm hoping to keep upgrading. There's many subjects on the website, because I'm a filmmaker, a painter, a musicologist, and a percussionist. And a lot of that is sampled on the website, which is myronort.com, myronort.com, and you can see many facets of things that I've done over the years there, including some reference. I think we started a page with the instruments, but I need to do more with that. And like I say, I'm starting to sell off some of my vintage conga drums. And you can find a way to make contact with me if you're interested, especially if you're kind of near Sonoma County. Then we don't have to ship these drums and pay a lot of money for shipping. Then you can come by and pick them up, get a lesson, decide if you like the sound, sort of thing. And I'll probably advertise those drums, I have already, on Craigslist. And I've also got some beautiful vintage timbales that I'll be selling, which I have not listed yet. All right.
So go and check out the website, and in a couple of months or so, we'll be coming back to speak on more about the Latin influences of music, but also about the folk instruments, I guess you would call them, that people play around the world. I was explaining about the diddly bow when I was here last time. But anyway, there's just so much interesting to talk about. And I thank you for being my guest, my friend.
Thank you.
And so listen, we're doing this after we did that song that we did. Well, I'm sure you've already heard it now, because early in the program, that Chuck Berry song Havana Moon. I hope you guys enjoyed that. and you should go and listen to that record. You know, it's a whole different side of Chuck Berry that you don't find, and it has a Cuban.
Yeah,
feel
if I'm not
to it.
mistaken, some of the early popular Cuban tunes did not use the tumbao pattern. The tumbao pattern that I showed. What they used was generally called the Afro son beat, or just the Afro beat.
Yeah, okay.
And I believe that Havana Moon used that beat.
Yes.
A lot of tunes use that beat.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one.
And that kind of has been phased out. You don't hear it so often anymore, but a lot of the early tunes that you heard on 78 records that were Cuban use that beat. Oh, there's just a wealth of Cuban rhythms for sure. Different styles. It's hard to keep track of them all.
So listen, we're going to continue with this. This is going to be really interesting next time because we're going to cover so much. Here's what I'm saying. Go to the website, check it out. If you are into drums or would like to get into drums, you can get a drum and a lesson. Okay, now come on. You can't beat that with a stick.